Washington's clear-thinking headquarters. The Morning Majority, 5 to 9 on 630 WMAL.
7:37, Morning Majority. Brian Neiman, Major Garrett National Journal in this morning. Mary Catherine Ham from the Daily Caller as well. Steve Moore is here, senior economics writer, Wall Street Journal, who was filling in, sitting in your guys' seats a couple of weeks ago. Got up bright and early. Not as early this morning, huh, Steve?
Good morning.
Hey, what do you think about the economic impact? The president said last night that it would have a big economic impact if the government shuts down. Is that true in your estimate?
Well, look, I think the big economic impact is if we don't do something about this deficit. I mean, we've got a $1.5 trillion deficit this year. If we stay on the course the president sets, we borrow another $1 trillion a year for the next 10 years. So I'm infuriated when people say, oh, my goodness, we just have to go along to get along and stay on automatic pilot on the budget. No, that's what will cause the economic crisis, and it's going to come soon. So I think the president has acted very irresponsibly. There's no question in my mind the president from the outset has wanted a government shutdown because he thinks he can win this politically.
But for what you're saying, though, that it's not this year's budget, this 2011, the CR, that is the big thing. It's the 2012 budget and looking ahead is where we really have to make changes.
We need to put a plan in place. I like what Paul Ryan came up with. God bless that guy. I think he's the first person since Ronald Reagan who came up with a budget that cut this spending. But my point is, here all we're trying to do with this 2011 budget is taking the very first baby step on a long journey to getting this budget under control. And President Obama doesn't even want to do that.
Well, and the whining and crying over the several billions is quite disconcerting for the future fights.
That's for sure. And, look, I personally, I think the Republicans probably should have just cut a deal with Obama and moved on. This is what we wrote in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Mm-hmm. Because the big battle really is this Ryan budget and putting in place these major reforms and entitlements. And some of my Tea Party friends are saying, well, even this budget that Republicans put together this year isn't enough cuts. And I say, well, wait a minute, stick around. Next year, the Republican budget would cut over $150 billion out of the budget, and the year after that, it cuts $200 billion.
Steve, it's Major Garrett here.
Hey, Major.
Hey, how are you? One of the questions legislatively, politically, and as policy is considered on Capitol Hill is, look, the Ryan budget, which I know you support, doesn't include any revenue increases. It's revenue neutral. It reforms the tax code, but it does not add revenue. The Gang of Six on the Senate side has at least opened to the idea of larger revenue. Saxby Chambliss, Tom Coburn, and others say that would largely be driven by economic growth, but they are open to the idea that you could raise taxes in order to get this grand bargain, as long as you are also significantly restructuring the tax code, lowering personal and corporate rates, and getting rid of some exclusions, tax expenditures, they're called. Where do you come down on that, and do you think that the Ryan budget, though you may like it as a policy document, has any kind of shelf life politically?
That's a great question, Major. First of all, I'm just against tax increases, and I wrote a piece in the Journal a few months ago. Every time we've raised taxes, it has not reduced the deficit. Liberals just use that extra revenue to raise spending. So that's never been a formula for reducing the deficit. But look, Major, we have to do two things to get the deficit under control. Number one, we have to get spending on a much lower trajectory. That's what the Ryan budget does. And the second thing we have to do is we have to grow this economy as we grew the economy in the 80s and 90s. If you do that, Major, you're going to get huge flows of revenues into the Treasury, and that's the reason we balanced the budget in the late 1990s. The economy boomed. We had 9 or 10% revenue growth, and so the best way to balance the budget, I think, is to do that tax reform, get the rates down, get rid of all the pollution in the tax system. I know, Major, you know about that story about General Electric paid no corporate income tax, and I just ran a Whirlpool. Whirlpool is not going to have to pay corporate tax for 10 years, and it's a profitable company. I love the idea of bringing the rates down, getting rid of all these credits and all these carve-outs in the tax system to make it fairer and raise more revenue.
And interesting, Steve, I moderated a panel last week where Howard Dean was there, and he said some interesting things about secretly hoping for a shutdown, but he also said something on the issue of repatriation of wealth for corporations that have their money parked offshore to avoid U.S. corporate taxation. He said, look, liberals need to get over themselves, repatriate that money, lower the rates, and do things to generate economic growth. And I thought to myself, look, if I'm listening to Howard Dean say liberals need to get over themselves on the question of repatriation,
Really?
possibly there's a deal that can be struck here.
Well, I think so. And by the way, as of April 1st, which was just a few days ago, the United States now is the world leader in the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Japan, as of April 1st, which used to be the highest corporate tax rate in the world, cut their tax rate. I don't like our chances in the global economy going forward with the highest tax rate in the world. And by the way, Major, if Howard Dean is even saying that, then I think maybe we do have a bipartisan consensus emerging.
Well, Steve, one other thing we have to work on with the deficit is something you've written about in the last week about the number of public employees, the amount of benefits given to those is extremely generous in many states, and that's what so many states are up against right now. What do you think about Wisconsin and the fact that it looks like this conservative-leaning judge that had conservatives behind him came out with that victory over the liberal in spite of all that union sort of momentum and excitement?
Well, Mary Catherine's a great point. I think this is a seminal event because what happened here was the unions, the public employee unions, put millions and millions of dollars behind trying to defeat this conservative state Supreme Court judge. And what's really interesting about this story is a week ago, that judge would have been defeated. The liberals had all the momentum. And here's a story. The real story here is how the Tea Party rallied. Right. And the grassroots rallied in Wisconsin to save this guy. And I don't know the latest. I think now the Republican Prosser is up. Isn't he up by 5,000 or 6,000 votes now?
Yeah, yes. 7,000, I think.
Well, and the turnout in that county that was Republican leaning was 47% on a Supreme Court election.
So this was a big deal because, obviously the union strategy was to defeat Prosser in Wisconsin and then to send this out as a signal all over the country saying this is what happens if you try to reform public pensions. It's really, I think one of the ironic notes is that at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday, believe it or not, I'm on the MoveOn.org mail list. And they sent out this celebratory email to all their thousands of, contributors saying, we won, this proves that. So, but this is going to, I think, help in states like Ohio and states like Illinois and Indiana and hopefully even in California to get these pensions under control.
All right, Steve, great to have you on the show as always. We appreciate your time.